Welcome to another edition of The Bottom Line. Jim, we're living through a health crisis and an economic crisis. And the big worry is if this goes on long enough, it will turn into a housing crisis too.
Well, it hasn't yet, but it will soon because the census is telling us that about 7% of people don't have enough money to make the rent next month. In fact,
Right.
a lot of them are already behind. The Centers for Disease Control has forbidden evictions for non-payment of rent up until December, but the renters that will still owe what they can't pay now in December. And if that is not extended, we can expect a crisis in January when it's cold outside.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's also a moratorium on foreclosures from federally guaranteed mortgages. That also runs till the end of the year. The problem is if you're behind on your rent or your mortgage, and during this moratorium, that money is not forgiven; it's just deferred. And when the moratorium ends, you owe the whole backlog. So if you're having trouble paying 1 month's rent, imagine how difficult it's going to be to come up with a couple or 3 or 4 months rent to get out of arrears.
Yeah, that's true. Landlords so far are doing okay. If they can't collect the rent eventually, they give up on, home maintenance and the maintenance
Right.
budget, and eventually they start defaulting on their mortgage, and you could see this crisis just billowing up through next year. So far, they're doing okay. The National Multifamily Housing Council says its revenue for its members, who are basically apartment managers, is down about 7%. That's something they can stand at this point. But they note that through until July, a lot of their unemployed tenants were getting $600 a month subsidies.
Yes.
For some of the people, that was cut to $300 a month, and now it's gone totally. And they are basically begging Congress to do something to help their renters.
Well, and there was money for renters in the CARES Act that passed in March. St. Louis and St. Louis County got a total of about $10 million, I think, for housing assistance to help people who are behind on their housing payments. That money is going to run out if Congress doesn't do something more. This is going to turn into a housing crisis. And you covered the last housing crisis. How it hits it hits the poorest the hardest. And hits neighborhoods with concentrations of low-income families very hard.
The landlords say that they're Class C apartment rentals, basically workforce housing. The lower end, they're seeing the trouble there, not in the high end.
Yeah.
So far. If we go, I don't think that this will last long enough. This pandemic will last long enough to send us into the cascade of financial problems that produced. First the tenants get thrown out. First there's increase in homelessness, people moving in with mom. 10 people living in 2-bedroom apartments, and then beyond that, the cascade through the financial system. The commercial and residential mortgage bonds. The apartment REITs start failing. If we get a vaccine and we get beyond this by April, maybe early summer, I can see we can avoid a financial catastrophe. But we will see the beginnings of it beginning next year, early next year.
Yeah, and there will be quite a human cost from that, even over and above the sort of the health crisis that we're living through. I think a timely aid package could get us through those next few months that would make a big difference to both renters and landlords, frankly.
And it's frustrating that we don't have it.
Yeah.
We've been talking about some kind of rescue package since the last one expired in July. Frankly, I'm frustrated and angry at both sides, Democrats and Republicans. You really ought to be able to reach a compromise here. And I don't know if it's the election or just bullheadedness on both sides, but they should have fixed this.
Oh, I agree. There should be there should be some elements that both sides can agree on, and housing ought to be right front and center.
That should be the first, because you have the Republicans who are listening at the small business people, the little landlords,
Yeah.
and you have the Democrats who are advocating for the people who are actually living in these apartments. And you think that this part at least should be fixable.
Mhm.